Liquid fire. The secret tanks that burned Iwo Jima. The smell hits you first. Not gunpowder. Not blood. Something older, something primal. Burning petroleum mixed with sulfur rising from volcanic rock. Thick enough to taste on the back of your throat. Then the heat. Not the radiant warmth of a campfire, but a wall of superheated air that scorches your lungs with every breath. And beneath all of it, beneath the mechanical roar and the crack of Japanese rifle fire and the thunder of naval artillery rolling in from the sea, you hear something else. A sound like the devil himself had opened a valve. A mechanical hiss. Compressed nitrogen at 300 pounds per square inch, straining against steel fittings machined by hand in a secret warehouse in Hawaii. Then a torrent. A river of burning, napalm-thickened fuel oil, orange and black, arcing through the cold Pacific morning air across 150 yards of volcanic ash, climbing for half a second at its apex, then crashing down into the aperture of a Japanese concrete pillbox like a waterfall from hell. The screams lasted only seconds. Staff Sergeant Robert Meza pressed his eye against the periscope of Tank 431 and watched the structure disappear behind a curtain of black smoke. He had 4 more pillboxes to destroy before sundown. He had a crew of 4 men, depending on him not to make a single wrong call. And somewhere out in that volcanic wasteland, somewhere beneath 11 miles of interconnected tunnel bored into the bedrock of an 8-square-mile island, 21,000 Imperial Japanese soldiers were waiting. February 20th, 1945. Day 2 of the Battle of Iwo Jima. The mathematics of death were about to change forever. To understand what those 8 modified Sherman tanks meant to the Marines who fought on Iwo Jima, you have to understand the island itself. Not what it looked like on a map, a pork-chop-shaped speck of volcanic rock 660 miles south of Tokyo, but what it did to men. The volcanic ash covering Iwo Jima's beaches was fine as powder, black as coal, and completely unstable underfoot. A man walking across it sank past his boot tops with every step. Running was barely possible. Digging a foxhole was futile. The walls collapsed as fast as you dug them. And the ash held heat. By midday, surface temperatures blistered unprotected skin. Beneath that ash lay the bones of a fortress. General Tadamaki Kurabayashi arrived on Iwo Jima in June 1944 with orders, a budget, and an architect's eye for terrain. He was not a typical Japanese commander. He had served as a military attaché in Washington. He had studied American industrial capacity firsthand. He understood what he was facing, and that understanding had led him to a conclusion that broke with centuries of samurai tradition. He could not win this battle on the beaches. He could not win it with bonsai charges or artillery duels or the fanatical individual courage that Japanese soldiers had shown from Guadalcanal to Polilliu. The Americans had firepower that answered every one of those tactics. What Kurabayashi had was something the Americans could not easily destroy: the ground beneath his feet. He went underground. By February 1945, Japanese engineers had completed 11 miles of interconnected tunnel, with plans drawn for 17 miles total. The finished sections reached 7 stories deep into volcanic rock, carved by men working with hand tools and compressed air drills through material as hard as poured concrete. 5,000 caves and underground chambers have been hollowed out across the island. The largest, a complex beneath Hill 382, contained a chamber 50 meters long and 20 meters wide, large enough to shelter an entire battalion. Underground hospitals were prepared to handle 400 wounded simultaneously. Communications centers buried 75 feet below the surface coordinated defensive operations through miles of telephone wire running through the rock itself. Kurabayashi positioned his forces with the precision of an engineer. 2,000 men under Colonel Kanehiko Atsuchi held the southern sector around Mount Suribachi, manning artillery positions covering every foot of the landing beaches. The northern plateau held 15,000 men under Kurabayashi's direct command, positioned in interlocking strongpoints designed so that attacking any one position exposed the attacker to fire from 3 others. A central reserve of 4,000 troops could shift through the tunnel network to reinforce any threatened sector within minutes, appearing behind the Americans from positions that looked like empty ground. Every pillbox was oriented to avoid exposure to direct naval gunfire. Every machine gun was sighted to create a kill zone covering the approach to the next position. Every artillery observation post was connected by telephone to fire control centers buried deep enough to survive everything except a direct hit from a battleship's main battery. For 74 consecutive days before the invasion, American aircraft and naval vessels had hammered Iwo Jima with everything they had. 6,800 tons of bombs, 22,000 naval shells ranging from 5-inch to 16-inch caliber. American planners concluded that most Japanese resistance had been neutralized. They projected the island would fall in 5 days. They had destroyed fewer than 200 of the 1,500 fortified positions on the island. The tunnel system was virtually untouched. When the first Marine landing craft ground onto Iwo Jima's black sand beaches on February 19, 1945, the Japanese let them come. For nearly an hour, the beaches were quiet. Marines of the 4th and 5th Divisions struggled through the volcanic ash, equipment bogging down, men exhausted just from walking. And then, exactly as Kurabayashi had planned, the doors of 1,000 fortified positions opened simultaneously. The slaughter was immediate and precise. Pre-registered artillery turned the beach into a killing ground. Machine guns fired in crossing patterns that left no cover. Mortars dropped rounds into concentrations of Marines with rehearsed accuracy. By nightfall on D-Day, the Marines had advanced less than 700 yards from the beach. First-day casualties, 2,420 killed or wounded. And conventional weapons, artillery, naval gunfire, the Sherman tanks of the 4th and 5th Tank Battalions were proving unable to crack the underground fortress. This was the problem that 8 men in Hawaii had spent 5 months trying to solve. Colonel George F. Unmack commanded the Chemical Warfare Service's most classified project in the Central Pacific, designated CNPAC, and he had 44 years of military experience to draw on when he assembled his team at Schofield Barracks in late 1944. The mission was specific and brutal in its directness. Develop a weapon capable of putting fire inside Japanese underground fortifications that artillery and bombing could not destroy. For engineering muscle, Unmacked requisitioned 25 men from the 117th Naval Construction Battalion, the Seabees. He added personnel from the 5th Marine Tank Battalion and the 81st Ordnance Company, creating a joint service team that crossed every bureaucratic boundary in the Pacific Theater. 2 men became the heart of the technical effort. Machinist Mate First Class A. Riker and electricians Mate Second Class Joseph Kissel were Seabees who had already seen enough Pacific combat to understand what happened when flamethrower operators tried to assault a fortified position on foot. The portable M2-2 flamethrower weighed 70 pounds fully loaded and gave a man 40 to 60 seconds of total fire at a range of 40 to 60 yards. To use it against a pillbox, the operator had to get within that range in the open while the pillbox was firing at him. Casualty rates for portable flamethrower teams exceeded 70% in Pacific combat. In some units, losses among flame operators reached 92%. Riker and Kissel understood the arithmetic. 40 yards of open ground against a machine gun was a death sentence. But what if the flamethrower didn't have to walk? What if it could drive? Previous attempts at armored flamethrowers had produced disappointing results. The Canadian Ronson system, mounted on light tanks, could reach out 60 to 80 yards with thickened fuel and carried 30 to 40 seconds of total fire. In field conditions, it failed more than 40% of time. The first American armored flamethrower in Pacific service, the Satan, a modified M3 light tank, demonstrated the concept worked but offered only 1.25 inches of armor protection. Against the 47mm anti-tank guns standard in Japanese defensive positions, the Satan was simply a target with a flame gun attached. Through channels reaching directly to Admiral Chester Nimitz's staff, Unmacked located 8 M4A3 Sherman medium tanks for conversion. These were combat-proven machines. The M4A3 was powered by a Ford GAA V8 engine developing 500 horsepower, moving 35 tons at a maximum road speed of 26 miles per hour. Armor ranged from 25mm at the belly to 76mm on the turret face, thick enough to deflect a 47mm round at combat ranges. Standard armament: a 75mm main gun in a fully traversing turret, 2.30 caliber machine guns, and a .50 caliber on the commander's hatch. Riker and Kissel studied 3 existing flamethrower systems, the British Ronson, the Navy Mark I, and German designs captured in North Africa, and began combining the best elements of each. Working 20-hour days in the Hawaiian heat, sleeping in shifts beside their welding equipment, they created the CB-H-1 Construction Battalion Hawaii Mark I. The specifications were a quantum leap. The CB-H-1 operated at 300 pounds per square inch, triple the pressure of previous designs, driving a fuel stream to targets at 150 yards, nearly 3 times the range of portable flamethrowers. The fuel mixture, diesel fuel, gasoline, and napalm powder in ratios developed by the 43rd Chemical Laboratory, burned at 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The system could maintain fire for up to 80 seconds, though doctrine called for 2 to 3 second bursts to conserve fuel and maintain accuracy. The main fuel tanks held 290 gallons of thickened mixture. The pressure system used compressed nitrogen, not compressed air, a critical decision because nitrogen is inert and won't support combustion if the pressure tank is penetrated. This single engineering choice eliminated the most catastrophic failure mode of earlier designs. But the most elegant innovation was structural. Riker and Kissel didn't bolt the flame projector to the hull like an afterthought. They replaced the Sherman's 75mm main gun entirely, installing the CB-H-1 in the main gun mantlet. The flamethrower had full 270-degree traverse through the existing turret drive and elevation from -10 to +35 degrees through the existing elevation mechanism. The gunner aimed the flame weapon through the same periscope and controls used for a conventional cannon. He required no additional training. Each conversion required 150 pounds of welding rod and 1,100 individual electrical connections. Fabrication time was 1,200 man-hours per vehicle, with 150 parts specially machined by CB metalworkers. Cost: $20,000 to $25,000 per tank, roughly $360,000 in today's money. The finished tanks were painted standard Marine Corps olive drab. No special markings. No indication whatsoever of their purpose. To any observer, including a Japanese soldier watching through binoculars, they looked exactly like ordinary Sherman tanks, until the moment they opened fire. The 8 CB-H-1 flamethrower tanks came ashore on D-Day, February 19th, mixed among the regular Shermans of the 4th and 5th Tank Battalions. They came in on the 5th wave, held in reserve while Marine commanders assessed the situation. The vehicles were numbered 431 through 438. Some crews had painted names on the hull: Hellfire, Corkscrew, Blaze of Glory. Most remained unmarked. For 24 hours, the flame tanks sat near the beach while the battle devolved into precisely the grinding nightmare Kurabayashi had designed. Sherman after Sherman was knocked out by concealed 47mm anti-tank guns. The volcanic ash defeated mobility. Interlocking fields of fire defeated maneuver. And the Japanese bunkers, concrete walls 4 feet thick, reinforced with salvaged steel rod, buried under 10 feet of volcanic rock, deflected 75mm rounds like gravel. By the morning of February 20th, the 21st Marine Regiment was pinned down attempting to cross Motoyama Airfield No. 1. 3 concrete pillboxes dominated the approach, their machine guns creating a kill zone 200 yards wide. 2 rifle companies had been decimated in frontal assaults. The regiment had taken 35% casualties in under 48 hours. Lieutenant Colonel William Duplantis, commanding the 3rd Battalion, 21st Marines, picked up his radio and called for the flamethrower tanks. At 1,420 hours, Tank 431 entered combat. Staff Sergeant Robert Meza was a veteran. Saipan, Tinian. He knew the terrain, the tempo, and the fear that lives behind your sternum when men outside are trying to kill you. Private First Class James Morrison, the driver, guided the tank through volcanic ash that built up between the track links and threatened to bog down the vehicle. The Ford the 5th 500 horsepower, 8 cylinders, pushed through it. In the turret, Corporal Thomas Carlson, the gunner, pressed his eye to the periscope and tracked the nearest pillbox. Corporal Anthony Vitelli monitored the CB-H-1 fuel pressure gauge. 300 psi, exactly where it needed to be. Meza gave the order at 125 yards. The H-1 released with a sound that Marines watching from 200 yards away would describe for the rest of their lives. Not an explosion, more like a vast mechanical exhalation. And then the stream of burning fuel was in the air, orange-white, trailing black smoke, arcing across the volcanic ash and crashing through the machine gun port of the first pillbox. Temperature inside rose past 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit in seconds. The oxygen was consumed so completely that the Japanese soldiers inside died of asphyxiation before flames reached their skin. Those who tried to flee through the rear exit found Marine riflemen positioned precisely for that eventuality. Carlson traversed the turret 30 degrees and engaged the second pillbox. A Japanese 47mm fired point-blank, the armor-piercing round striking tank 431's frontal plate and ricocheting skyward. The tank shuddered. It did not stop. Carlson triggered again. 15 seconds of sustained fire until black smoke rolled from every aperture. The third pillbox was positioned behind a rocky outcropping that prevented direct engagement. Meza ordered Morrison forward to 80 yards, well within range of satchel charges and magnetic mines. As the tank crested a rise, Japanese soldiers erupted from spider holes, running at the vehicle with explosives in their hands. This was the moment Riker and Kissel's key design decision paid its first dividend. Unlike earlier tank flamethrower conversions that could only fire forward, the Seabee H-1 in the Sherman's turret had full traverse. Carlson swung the gun 180 degrees in seconds and triggered the weapon directly behind the tank. The attacking infantry ran into a wall of burning napalm at 40 yards. With all three pillboxes destroyed, the Marines of the 21st Regiment advanced 400 yards in 2 hours. More progress than they had made in the previous 2 days combined. Word moved through the Marine communications network at the speed of a radio signal. The flamethrower tanks work. Within 6 hours of Tank 431's first engagement, all 8 Seabee H-1 vehicles were committed across the front. The tactical revolution was immediate. Tank 434, supporting the 23rd Marines near the East Boat Basin, destroyed 4 fortified positions in a single afternoon. The crew developed the corkscrew and burn approach, advancing in a spiral pattern to complicate Japanese anti-tank fire calculations while maintaining continuous flame suppression on the target. Tank 437 worked with the 24th Marines to develop breaching clear tactics. The sequence was precise. The flame tank neutralized the position's defenders. Then Marine engineers moved forward under the tank's shadow with demolition charges and destroyed the structure permanently. 1 flame tank and 1 engineer team destroyed 7 bunkers in a single afternoon, positions that had stopped an entire battalion for 2 days. Tank 432, working near the base of Mount Suribachi, revealed the weapon's most unexpected dimension. Sergeant William Patterson guided his vehicle to a position 100 yards from a complex of interconnected cave entrances and triggered a single short burst of flame into the air, not at any specific target. A demonstration. Through his periscope, he watched Japanese soldiers stream out of the cave complex through rear exits, abandoning positions they had been ordered to defend to the death, preferring the risk of Marine riflemen in the open to what that burning stream would do to them underground. In 30 minutes, without firing a shot at any specific target, Tank 432 caused the collapse of an entire defensive sector. Military historians would note it as the first mass abandonment of fortified positions by Japanese forces in the entire Pacific War. The numbers from the first 24 hours of Seabee H-1 operations: 47 fortified positions destroyed. Marine casualties in supported sectors down 40% from the previous day. 600 yards of territory gained in areas that had been static for 48 hours. And for the first time, significant numbers of Japanese soldiers were abandoning positions rather than dying at their posts. General Kurabayashi issued emergency orders that night. All 47mm anti-tank guns were to treat flame tanks as priority targets. Special assault teams, volunteers carrying explosive charges, were to be formed. Machine gunners were to target the vision blocks on flame tank turrets. None of it worked for one fundamental reason. The Seabee H-1 vehicles looked identical to standard Shermans until the moment they fired. By then, it was too late. On February 23rd, the same morning Marines raised the flag on Mount Suribachi, the CB-H-1 tanks faced their hardest test. Hill 382 was the cornerstone of Kuribayashi's northern defensive line. Named for its elevation in feet, it had been engineered to be impregnable. Bunkers reaching 7 stories underground. Every approach pre-registered with artillery and mortar fire, multiple defensive lines allowing retreating defenders to reappear behind attacking forces through the tunnel network. The 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, had lost 70% of its strength just taking the approaches. 4 CB-H-1 tanks advanced in echelon toward Hill 382, supported by 6 conventional Shermans and a full Marine infantry battalion. This time, the Japanese were ready in a new way. Hidden 75mm mountain guns had been positioned specifically to engage the flame tanks. As the lead tank crested the first rise, 3 concealed gun positions opened fire simultaneously. A round struck tank 433's track, shattering the pins. The vehicle was immobilized. The crew kept firing, traversing the turret in slow, methodical sweeps, creating a curtain of flame between the following tanks and the Japanese positions, buying time for the others to maneuver. A crew continuing to fight from a crippled vehicle, using their last operational capability to protect their comrades. Tank 431 pushed through the smoke at full throttle, Morrison navigating by periscope through obscuration so dense he could barely see 10 feet. Shell fragments rattled against the hull like hailstones on a tin roof. At 60 yards from the main bunker complex, Corporal Carlson triggered the CB-H-1, and the Japanese showed they had adapted. The bunker apertures had been fitted with steel plates that could be swung closed between machine gun bursts. The burning napalm mixture splashed harmlessly against sealed steel. For a moment, it seemed as if the Japanese engineers had found the answer. Corporal Michael Rodriguez, gunner of Tank 434, maintained flame contact with the sealed plates and watched. At 15 seconds, the plates began to glow. Not just warm, cherry red, approaching the yield point. He kept firing. 30 seconds, 40, 45, well past the doctrinal limit, dangerously depleting fuel reserves. The steel plate buckled. Gaps opened at the edges. Through those gaps, at 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, the napalm mixture poured into the bunker's interior. Ammunition stored inside cooked off in a chain of secondary explosions. Concrete cracked from thermal shock. The eruptions revealed tunnel entrances Japanese engineers had carefully concealed, and Marine infantry rushed forward with satchel charges, throwing demolition into every opening before defenders below could reorganize. In 3 hours, the outer defenses of Hill 382 had been breached. The impregnable position was falling. On that same day, in a narrow ravine the Marines called the amphitheater, terrain so broken and confined that no tank could maneuver through it, Corporal Herschel Woody Williams went where the machines could not. Williams was 21 years old, 5 feet 6, 145 pounds. He carried a 70-pound M2-2 portable flamethrower. For 4 hours, covered only by 4 Marine riflemen, 2 of whom would die protecting him. He worked through the ravine, approaching each pillbox close enough to fire, withdrawing, repositioning, firing again. He destroyed 7 machine gun emplacements. He did it in the open, with nothing between him and the Japanese defenders but 145 pounds of determination. His Medal of Honor citation described him as advancing daringly alone to attempt the reduction of devastating machine gun fire. The language is characteristically understated. The CB-H-1 tanks and Corporal Williams represented 2 approaches to the same problem, one industrial, one personal. On Iwo Jima, both were necessary. Williams lived until June 2022, dying at age 98. He was the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from the Battle of Iwo Jima. By end of the first week, the statistical picture was unambiguous. In sectors where flame tanks operated, Marine casualties were 40% lower. The 8 tanks had consumed 70,000 gallons of fuel mixture, requiring dedicated fuel mixing stations operating 24 hours a day, combining diesel, gasoline, and napalm powder in precise ratios. Mixed fresh because the combination separated and clogged flame guns after 72 hours. That supply chain stretched back to Pearl Harbor. Electricians Mate Kissel had come to Iwo Jima personally to supervise maintenance, because these were not mass-produced weapons with established protocols. They were hand-built machines, each slightly different from the others, requiring knowledge that existed only in the heads of the men who had built them. As March arrived and the battle moved to Iwo Jima's northern plateau, the terrain became the new adversary. Volcanic rock formations, sulfur pits, twisted ravines, knife-edged ridges were exactly what Kurabayashi had chosen for his final defensive line because they made tank operations nearly impossible. Sharp volcanic rock sheared track pins and sliced through rubber road wheels. The Seabees of the 5th Engineer Battalion responded the only way they knew. Working through the night under sniper fire, under mortar bombardment, they built roads where none existed. They cleared paths. They constructed ramps from rubble and volcanic rock. They dragged concrete debris from demolished Japanese structures and laid it as foundation for steel tracks to bite into. In the dark, without headlights, by feel and memory and the stubborn competence that defines the best engineers in any army. When terrain still prevented direct approach, the CB H-1 crews improvised. They fired indirectly, bouncing streams of burning fuel off rock faces to reach around corners into defilated positions. The napalm mixture, once burning, didn't care about angles. It flowed where gravity took it. On March 8th, day 17, Tank 436 achieved what the crew themselves called the impossible shot. The 9th Marines were assaulting caves and bunkers built into a near-vertical cliff face in the area known as Cushman's Pocket. The position was elevated, protected by the cliff itself, seemingly immune to flamethrower attack because no flame gun could elevate enough to arc burning fuel over the edge and down into Japanese positions from above. The CB H-1's maximum elevation was 35 degrees. Reaching the target required 40. Sergeant Daniel Foster studied the terrain for 10 minutes. Then he told his driver to position Tank 436 on a mound of rubble left by naval bombardment, perhaps 4 feet high, sloping at roughly 5 degrees. With the tank climbing the mound and Corporal Vitelli elevating the gun to maximum, the combined angle approached 40 degrees. Mortar rounds were falling around them. The tank was balanced on debris that could shift at any moment. Foster ordered Vitelli to fire. The stream of burning napalm arced high into the Pacific sky, higher than any flame weapon had fired in the Pacific War, reached its apex, and fell into the Japanese cave complex from above. Like artillery, like rain, like something the defenders had never imagined could reach them. Witnesses reported Japanese soldiers leaping from the cliff face rather than burn. After that day, no Japanese defensive position on Iwo Jima could be considered truly safe. By mid-March, the CB-H-1 tanks had become the nucleus of a combined arms system that would shape Marine Corps doctrine for decades. Each flame tank now operated with a dedicated escort, conventional Shermans to suppress anti-tank positions, infantry to protect against suicide attackers, engineers for obstacle clearance, and logistics vehicles carrying the 300-gallon fuel trailers that extended operational endurance. This wasn't doctrine from a headquarters manual. It had been worked out engagement by engagement, tank by tank, in volcanic ash by sergeants and corporals and private first-class soldiers who learned by surviving. The Japanese response evolved but remained inadequate. Special anti-tank teams, volunteers carrying explosive charges, achieved their most significant success on March 11th. When Tank 438 was destroyed, 3 of its 5 crew members killed. But for every flame tank damaged, repair teams worked through the night to restore it. The supply of desperation available to Kurabayashi's remaining forces was finite. The supply of American industrial production was not. Kurabayashi's assessment of the CB-H-1 tanks, transmitted to Imperial General Headquarters on March 17th, was his most honest analysis of the entire battle. The flame tanks had proven more effective than all American artillery and aerial bombardment combined. They achieved in minutes what conventional weapons could not accomplish in days. There was no effective counter. And then he wrote something that read as the strategic epitaph of the entire Pacific War. The Americans have not just superior numbers. They have superior imagination. The crescendo came in the final week of March, in the terrain the Marines called the Bloody Gorge. A twisted maze of ravines and cave complexes less than 700 yards square, jammed into the northern tip of the island. 3,000 Japanese defenders, The survivors of Kurabayashi's once formidable force, many wounded, many starving, had pulled back here for their final stand. On March 21st, day 30, all operational CBH-1 tanks, 6 of the original 8 with 2 under repair, concentrated for a coordinated assault, reinforced by 4 additional flame tanks rushed from Hawaii. The formation was a crescent, 6 CB-H-1 vehicles spread across a front wide enough to cover every avenue of approach, their flame arcs overlapping so that no space between them went unengulfed. Marine infantry followed 50 yards behind, close enough to exploit the shock effect, far enough back that the heat blast didn't singe their eyebrows. Tank 431, Mays's tank, the first one to fire on February 20th, led the advance. Its armor showed every week of the battle. Welded patches where shell fragments had found their way through. Dents from direct hits that failed to penetrate. Track pins replaced 3 times. The Ford the 5th 8 beneath the engine deck had been running almost continuously for 3 weeks. It ran still. Tank 433, rebuilt after the Hill 382 track hit with a makeshift repair that gave it a distinctive clanking cadence, held the left flank. The Gorge assault consumed 8,000 gallons of fuel in a single day, a campaign record. When it was over, more than 800 Japanese defenders lay dead. Marine casualties, 92 killed and 257 wounded, a fraction of what the same ground would have cost by conventional infantry assault. But the cost was not only measured in bodies. Corporal Carlson, the gunner who had fired Tank 431's first shot on February 20th, testified years later about what it was like inside a CB-H-1 during the assault on the Bloody Gorge. He spoke of hearing screaming when the flame connected. Brief, he said, not long, but audible through the steel hull and the roar of the engine. He spoke of the smell, burning flesh mixed with sulfur from the volcanic rock, a combination that doesn't exist anywhere else and cannot be mistaken for anything else. He spoke of maintenance crews having to use blowtorches to remove human remains from the tank's tracks. He said he still heard the screams at night. 50 years later, Iwo Jima was declared secure on March 26, 1945. 36 days instead of the projected 5. American casualties, 26,038, including 6,821 killed. Of approximately 21,000 Japanese defenders, 216 survived as prisoners of war. The rest died fighting or by their own hands rather than face capture or the flame. Post-battle analysis credited the CB-H-1 operations with preventing an estimated 5,000 American casualties. The 8 tanks destroyed over 1,000 fortified positions, consumed 360,000 gallons of fuel mixture, and in sectors where they operated, increased the rate of advance by 300%. Over 30% of total Japanese casualties on the island, more than 6,000 men, were killed by flame weapons, tank-mounted and portable combined. The Marine Corps immediately requested 54 additional flamethrower tanks for future operations. Colonel Unmack's team at Schofield Barracks went into production on the improved CB-H-2 model, working with the same priority rating assigned to the B-29 bomber program and the Manhattan Project. By June 1945, 70 new flame tanks were staged and ready for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of the Japanese home islands. That invasion never happened, but the 8 hand-built machines that Riker and Kissel had fabricated in a Hawaiian warehouse had already made their contribution to the calculus that shaped those decisions. The Army, watching what the Marines had accomplished, converted the entire 713th Tank Battalion to flame tanks for the Okinawa campaign. Army flame tanks consumed 200,000 gallons of fuel during that battle, proving equally effective against Okinawa's cave complexes. A weapon that began as a last-minute improvisation had become standard equipment. Machinist Mate Riker and electricians Mate Kissel came home and returned to civilian life. Their names appeared in classified technical reports that sat in filing cabinets for decades. No tikertape parade. No medal ceremony. The work was too classified, too specific, too far from the conventional heroism that newspapers celebrated. Colonel Unmacked continued in chemical weapons development until his retirement. The official record documented specifications, production numbers, casualty estimates. What could not capture was what it meant to have built the weapon that changed a battle. Japanese officers who survived provided the most honest assessment. Lieutenant Yamada, one of 216 prisoners taken on Iwo Jima, had watched Tank 431's first engagement from a Japanese observation post on the morning of February 20th. In post-war testimony to American intelligence officers, he said, "We had prepared for every form of death. Bullets, shells, bayonets, starvation. We had not prepared for burning petroleum that sought us out in our deepest bunkers. The flame tanks turned our greatest strength, our underground fortifications, into our tombs." Staff Sergeant Meza, commander of Tank 431, never spoke publicly about his service for nearly 5 decades. Shortly before his death in 1993, he sat down with his grandson and said what would become the closest thing to a public statement he ever made. "We did what we had to do. Nobody should be proud of burning men alive. But those tanks saved a lot of Marine lives. That's what I try to remember." In 1985, Meza and Lieutenant Yamada stood together on Iwo Jima, on the ground where Tank 431 had first fired 40 years before. Through an interpreter, Yamada said, "I hated you for 40 years. The flame tanks killed my friends in ways I cannot forget. But I understand now. War makes monsters of us all. You did what you had to do, as did we." Meza answered simply, "We were all just boys trying to survive. I'm glad we both lived to stand here today." Two old soldiers embraced on black volcanic sand, in sight of Mount Suribachi, where a flag had been raised 40 years before. Tank 434 sits today in the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia. The welding marks are visible where armor was patched in the field. The dents from shell impacts that failed to penetrate are there if you know where to look. The scratches from volcanic rock tell the story of the terrain it crossed. The CB H-1 flame gun that replaced the 75mm main gun is still in the mantlet. The same turret position, the same fire control system, the same periscope a Sherman gunner used for a cannon round. Simple, elegant, lethal. School children on field trips ask why anyone would build such a thing. Veterans who understand the answer pause longer. Some of them salute. The men who designed the CB H-1 came home quietly and were forgotten. The men who crewed it mostly never spoke of what they had done. The men who died facing it were buried in volcanic soil that still holds their bones. 8 modified Sherman tanks, 1,400 man-hours of fabrication per vehicle, 360,000 gallons of fuel, more than 1,000 fortified positions destroyed, an estimated 5,000 American lives saved. Not a complicated calculation. Not if you were one of the 5,000. Outgunned on the beaches, outnumbered underground, but never out-imagined. Not on Iwo Jima. Not ever.